Welcome to the Zayari Wellness Podcast, where we learn about other people's journeys. Regardless of age, race, religion, or status, we're all just human and have one thing in common: the ups and downs of life. Join me in welcoming our special guest, Shawna, as we explore stress and the impact it has on your nervous system.
Hi there, my name is Shawna Bigby Davis, and I am here to chat with you all about nervous system regulation and helping you understand why it seems like your body is breaking all at once. Doesn't it feel that way?
Yeah.
So Jocelyn and I thought maybe we could have a conversation about, like, why do you wake up one day and suddenly your hair's falling out and you've gained 10 pounds and you can't sleep at night and you hate everyone around you and you wish everything would just disappear?
Isn't that just like part of just getting older though? Like that's the natural course of things. You just kind of deteriorate.
Okay, so that's the lie I was told.
Yes. I'm glad
that is the lie I was told.
This was not a pre-planned conversation, y'all.
No. No, I accidentally got pregnant at 36, and they called that a quote unquote geriatric pregnancy. And I was like, 36 is geriatric? Like, that was news to me.
Interesting.
And directly afterwards, I felt like dog poo, and I kept going to doctors and specialists, and I was like, what is happening to me? And they were like, oh, it's because you had a baby late in life, and this is like the course of a woman, and it's all downhill from here, and that's just the natural aspect of aging. And I was like, what? No, this feels wrong. This is like, something is not right.
Yeah, it's like a switch all of a sudden,
Yeah. And they're like, well, that's perimenopause. And I'm like, I just hit perimenopause like one day. Like, what? How is that? And then what ended up happening is 12 years later, I found out that I had 4 autoimmune conditions. And yeah. and I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, I had these for a long time, and they either misdiagnosed them and or like didn't care enough to dig deeper to understand that I had them. And I was like, okay, well, the first question I have is why and how did I get them? And what led me, it led me down a path of like trauma resolution, trauma healing, all the trauma, all the teens, and then gut healing. Actually, gut healing is where I first started. And when I started with gut healing, within 5 days, I couldn't pick up a pen. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't brush my hair. I couldn't make a fist. It took me 10 minutes to get up out of a chair. I was very broken. My body was in a lot of pain, physical pain.
And how old are you when this all was happening?
This is probably now I'm like 42 at this point. And I had a business. I had an agency where we did marketing and branding. We had 24 employees, high stress situation, right? Like I was on the line for paying people's bills and paying for college tuitions and making sure that people had insurance, right? So there was a lot of stress on me.
Yeah.
I also had a young child at the time. And also I had many, many suitcases of unprocessed childhood trauma and that I brought along with me.
Yeah.
And what I understood at the time is like, so when I found out, one of the key pieces that I learned was that I had rheumatoid arthritis, and I found out there was a diet for rheumatoid arthritis. I went on that diet that day, and within 5 days I could like make a fist again and I could stand up. And I was like, it was like a Claritin commercial where like everything was like in color suddenly. And I thought, this is crazy. Why? How is this working? How is like food? And I thought that I ate really well at the time.
Yeah.
Like, how is that working? So then I dug a little deeper, and that's what led me to nervous system regulation. Nervous system regulation led me to trauma therapy, and all of it working together. I was like, it literally hit me like a brick wall. I'm like, oh, they're all interconnected. And yet we seemingly think about them very individually. And worse, none of my doctors knew anything about any of them.
Right. I love it. Okay, look, I want to break down a lot of the things that you just said, and I love it. Okay, so can you let the audience know like what your credentials are, and that way that they know that you're just not like, oh, this is just my life. Like, this inspired me.
Yeah. So for 20 years, I worked in marketing and advertising. I was a creative director. And the day that I found out that I had all these autoimmune conditions, I'm like, The world has to stop and the way I'm living life has to stop. So I sold my business and I went on this healing journey. And I wanted to learn absolutely everything I could about how and why my body feels the way it did. And so that led me to getting lots of certifications in internal family systems, somatic healing work, somatic trauma therapies, in addition, nutritional therapies and health coaching. And so I brought all of those things together, plus my background in marketing and design. And I thought, well, I think I can bring all this together and put it in some sort of coaching app. And so that's what I've done. And right now, we're in beta also, a nervous system health coaching app, and it's called Your Daily. And we give daily, small daily habits to heal the nervous system. And it's for women with autoimmune and burnout conditions and who want to heal naturally step by step.
Yes. And, it's crazy to me. Becoming a therapist has been a whole like journey for me. I was like, I hate people. That's not. People are like, what? You're a therapist? Like, what do you mean you didn't want to be a therapist? You're so good at what you do. And I'm like, yeah, because like there's nothing like lived experience of the nonsense to get through the other side. And then as a therapist, when you're like taking all these trainings and all this stuff that you need for these certifications, you start realizing like, wow, this knowledge that we obtain as professionals in this field is lacked from the rest of the world. And most people don't even know their why. Like, why is this happening? Oh, I'm just bipolar, which gets misdiagnosed a lot. If you have childhood trauma and you get diagnosed with bipolar disorder, no.
I was diagnosed bipolar right after I had my daughter. And I was like, literally, I had a 30-minute consultation because I went to somebody and I was like, hey, I think I'm having really, really bad postpartum depression. And we had a 30-minute session. And at the end of it, 30 minutes, she diagnosed me with bipolar.
You're bipolar. No, there's let me tell you something. Look, what are you talking about? 30 minutes is all I need to know to know about your whole life. Like, that's okay, And that's a whole nother beef for me. That's separate. This is not my venting session. So I just, want to let the world know the inspiration behind like your business, my business. Like, there's so much knowledge we've obtained just by getting these credentials that I think it's unfair for the rest of the world to not know that. And then the price, all the thousands of dollars like that you have to spend.
Lord, every time I see another price tag, I'm like, you're like, it's worth it.
Right. and the
gatekeeping.
Correct. The gatekeeping. This is the inspiration behind like, I'm going to create something so that people have the knowledge, because unlike most people, I am a very controversial therapist, and I'll be the first one to say most people don't need a therapist. Like, honestly, like most people, if you just understood how your brain and your body and your emotions are interconnected with the way that you relate to people, like that's all you need to know. Like sometimes some people do need therapy. Don't get me wrong. I love my job. I know people need me, but I'm like, half the stuff that I'm saying, I'm like, if you just knew, and then you start teaching them about IFS or like how there's different parts of you, and you start teaching them about how trauma dysregulates the nervous system, and what really looks like a mood swing and bipolar disorder is really different parts of you being triggered by other things, and your body being completely out of whack because your nervous system is looking for danger when there is none.
And also, like these trained responses in our brain, but then you come down to, especially if you're working with women, most of us have some sort of disordered eating. And so we don't get the right nutrients. So we're not even feeding our nervous system the right thing, right? So we're like irritated and agitated from the inside, not only just mentally and emotionally from our nervous system, but like what we're feeding ourselves or the lack of nutrients that we have. And all of that ties together, right? Like so many, misdiagnoses come from like poor food or poor. Sometimes I work with people and they've got food allergies or they got food sensitivities, and we take some of that stuff out. Suddenly they feel a huge sigh of relief. They're like, oh, I don't feel as angry anymore because
Right.
I took almonds out of my diet, right? Like, and their body was angry because they were constantly being triggered and irritated inside their body. Their body was constantly mounting a response. So not only do you have like the childhood trauma and the hypervigilant nervous system, but then you're feeding your body. And because you've dissociated from your head to your body, you're not in touch with when your body is telling you, hey, this food is actually really irritating to me, or this food is really aggravating for me.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned like somatics as well, that you know about somatics, because a lot of people don't know about what somatics is.
Yeah.
You know, so I want to take a moment to like educate the audience a little bit what somatics is, and you can just pitch in whenever you need to. So for those who don't know, somatics is really understanding and getting in touch with your body, like your physical body, not just like, oh, I'm just gonna like be hippie and just be, no, like that's not what somatics is. And I think that has a misunderstanding that that's what somatics is.
Yes.
But somatics is really understanding and being, can you be with yourself? And one of the things about trauma is that most people cannot be still and with themselves because it makes you uncomfortable, you know? And so there's this layer, like you said, of dissociation, which means I am checked out from myself. I am checked out from others, to makes you desensitized to your own body, to your own emotions, to your own thought processes. And you're living on autopilot, like there's a machine running you and you're just barely getting by. You're not really living. And so somatics is, how can I connect with my body and get back in touch? Because before you had a brain, developmentally, you had a body. And we are instinct before anything.
My favorite thing to share with people is that, like that, so there's like a two-way highway happening from your brain down to your gut. And that's that vagus nerve, right? The central nervous system. And it is not the same both ways. So it's a 4-lane highway going up, like, so starting from the gut up to the brain, it's a 4-lane highway. Going down from the brain to the gut, it's a 1-lane highway. That means that we feel before we think. So we sense things in our gut. It sends it up to the brain. And then the brain basically goes through like, hey, have I seen and felt and sensed this before? And what is this like? And then it says, oh, because I've done this before, here's a response. And then it tells the body how to respond. But and that all happens lickety split, right? But the thing is, we often, we have the wrong idea that everything that we feel originates in the brain first. And it's so backwards. Like we actually feel things in our body first, and it's up to our brain to then go and execute.
Yes. And you know what's crazy? Like working with clients that have a trauma history, which is most of the clients that I work with. Sure. You know, I do EMDR, so that's a whole other story.
My favorite.
Yes. Only thing that worked for me, by the way. I'm like, oh,
because it's somatically based, by the way.
Exactly.
EMDR, working with the eyes. The biggest part of our nervous system is our eyes.
Or like, anyways, I get nerdy when it comes to EMDR.
Yes. Okay.
I'm not
Sorry.
even gonna go there. But I love that you said that it's like a gut response, like somatics, because for people that have a trauma history, your gut is wrong. Your gut tells you the wrong thing sometimes, you know, in terms of like, oh, I have a gut feeling about this person. And like you said, it connects to a different experience that you had before. So maybe that person didn't do anything to you and it just reminds you of someone. And so your body is telling you this person is bad for you, or this person isn't good, or this person's going to hurt you. And all of a sudden you think, oh, there's just something about them. No, baby. If you have a trauma history, you got to check your gut. Your gut could be wrong. And it's most likely a trigger. Not all the time, but sometimes it is. And so I find that it's the fine line, you know, of how can I trust my gut again? Or is this really a gut instinct that's backed by wisdom versus a reaction that I'm having to somebody?
We talk to clients a lot, and we talk about like, well, how do I know if this is my gut talking to me or my true self talking to me? And your true self is always coming from a neutral place. And so if your gut is telling you, quote unquote, is telling you bad things, negative things, that's typically not your true self, right? That's a trauma response. And so if you're like, well, what's the easy way to go about this? Like to know, Like, is it coming from a place of like fear, or is it coming from a place of neutrality?
I love it. Yes. You know, it's crazy, the language of people that like know these things. This is what I tell my clients, and they're like, well, how do I know, right? Like if everything is like out of whack, like how do I learn to trust myself? And I said, okay, well, before you make a decision, take a step back and ask yourself, is this coming from a place of fear or a place that is healed? Because if it doesn't come from a place that is healed, you may have to question the quality of decision that you're making in your life.
Yeah. And the thing is, we get to talk from learned experience, because no one comes into this world or into this business because they're like on a whim, right? It's not like going to catering or going into like food service. Like, you come here because, like you said, like I said before, like you're carrying some baggage with you, and you've been through the shedding of the layers and getting rid of the baggage. And it feels like you just want to share that light with other people. And so when we're trying to share it with other people, it's, one of the things that I find, and I'd be curious to hear from you, is it took me a long time to start to understand how to talk to people at the level of hurt that they're still at. And so when I, initially in the beginning, I was like, oh, you've got to feel it to heal it. And they were like, feeling it is scary.
Yeah.
Why the hell would I possibly want to tap into my body? This place that has like defied me and treated me poorly and like is failing me. Why would I possibly want to tap into that?
Yes. Okay. Look, I love this so much because, so I'll tie it back. So my personal journey, I did talk therapy for about 5-6 years, and it only got me far enough to where it's like, oh, I'm aware now of what the things are. Right. And I know I need to put boundaries, but I had this problem because I couldn't set boundaries to save my life. I had the please response, like, oh, whatever, like, and when I did EMDR is when I started realizing the root of these things and where they come from.
Yes.
And then the world of somatics opened for me, and I'm like, oh, hell no. Let me tell you. Like, I have a journal where I like journal things, about like my faith or like my process or my progress or whatever. And I opened my journal, and I kid you not, 2 years ago to this date, I wrote down, I really feel the need to just be still and be in silence. And as I read the journal the other day, I was doing this, and it was like, nope, can't be still. Nope, can't be silent. No, it took me 2 years. It literally took me 2 years to be able to sit with myself, because I was so dysregulated that my body was automatically like, you can't be still. You have to keep functioning. You have to find something else to do. There's always something else to clean. There's always another task to do. And it wasn't until I was able to be still and meet myself at that place. Okay, that's not where I'm at. Okay, that's not where I'm at. Let me take my time. Now I'm here. And when I did somatics, I'm like, oh, this is gross. Like, I always, when they're like, oh, like land in your body, like, what does this feel like? I always felt like throwing up.
Yes.
I always felt like throwing up. And it was so weird to me. And I'm like, what the heck? Why do I feel like throwing up? And when I really connected with that thing, I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I've been carrying things that are mine that weren't meant for me to give. And that, to me, my body wanting to throw up was telling me that I am disgusted by the behavior of other people that were in my life.
Yes.
And how they treated me.
That's powerful.
Like, that insight that you get from really connecting with yourself is nothing that any therapist can ever tell you. Ever.
Totally.
And a good therapist won't tell you what's wrong with you. They'll lead you how to discover your own answers.
Oh, I love that. That's good. I have to tell you, it's like a little anecdote. So I did a program called Landmark. Some people know it. It's a little controversial because it's kind of like group therapy through like play-based activities. And it can be very triggering for some people. For me, it was very therapeutic and I loved it. Mm-hmm. But there was one particular thing that we did at the end where there was just like a giant line, and I think there was about 100 of us, and we all get together and we just individually, you hug somebody for, I think it's a minute, right? It's timed. And then the little chime goes off, then you move to the next person, you hug them. And I got like 10 people in, and I had a physical, visceral reaction, and I had to go vomit. And my body said, no, like this is too much too soon, right?
Yes.
Like, hugging this many strangers was very, very, very triggering for me.
Yeah.
And I had a visceral reaction to it.
Wow.
And my body was like, I went into the other room and I vomited. And I was like, that was a moment for me. I was like, whoa, why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is touching other people or having them hold me in a quote unquote like safe space?
Yeah.
Why was that triggering for me?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't mind sharing, what did it show you?
Oh, I didn't trust anybody. And I didn't trust anybody. And that feeling of sort of letting yourself go and be seen and be held by somebody else was incredibly dysregulating for me, because I am somebody who cannot be, or at least I used to, this was about 7 years ago, somebody who could not like let myself just be supported or just be like, right. I had to do everything myself.
Yeah.
And the act of sitting in a stranger's arms and just like letting them like me or hug me or, appreciate me without giving them something in return was very dysregulating, especially as a recovering people pleaser, right? Like, I'm like, oh, for them to like me, I need to give them something.
Yeah.
I need to be of value to them.
Yeah. And let's talk about like the shaping of that too, because I think especially, I can only speak as a woman and I can't speak for men. But I think men too have a hard time being held, It's funny that like, for my world, I'm doing the game about the stress responses, right? And one of them, the freeze response, is the stabilizer. And what's crazy about people like that is they're shut down completely, right? And to awaken that is so difficult. It is very difficult to awaken that, because with all these stress responses, anyways, if you find yourself leaning towards one thing all the time, you are living in autopilot, period. Your nervous system is dysregulated. If you don't know when to be protective and when to turn it off, you're living in stress. If you don't know when to do tasks and live with achievement and perfection and don't know how to turn it off, you're living in the flight response. If you don't know how to feel and you shut off all the time, or you don't know how to do vice versa, like same thing with pleasing. Like healing has nothing to do with I will never feel bad or that I won't experience things. Healing has to do I have the capacity to be able to experience these things when they're necessary?
Yeah.
There is a time to be protective. Yeah. There is a time to be defensive. There is a time to please. There is a time to do and achieve. There is a time to push people away and shut down because, you know what, I need my space. But it isn't until you get put in those situations and ask yourself the question, can I be vulnerable? Because intimacy and vulnerability are the things that break our nervous system.
Oh, for sure.
But are the very things that heal it.
Absolutely. And that, I think
crazy.
that's so crazy to me, is like this place of, you have to get curious about the thing that is the most icky to you. Like the thing that makes you just like angry or frustrated or completely turned off, like that is the place for some introspection and understanding like why. And, going back to your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I don't know if you said fold, but fold is one of my favorites also. What I find over and over again is when people start to heal, they're able to move in and out of those states. Like they can experience grief, or they can experience frustration, or they can experience anger. They can experience all those things, but they're able to bring themselves back into regulation in sort of a reasonable amount of time. If you find yourself angry and you're stuck in anger, that's something to look at, right? Like if you're like stuck in depression, that's something to look at. But people are like, oh, well, I got really angry today, so I must be dysregulated. No, anger is a gift, because that says, hey, somebody went against my boundaries. Yeah. And I'm in protection mode. Yeah. And we want that. We need that. You can't just go around just open all the time.
Exactly. I love it. And that's a question that I ask a lot of my clients is, what is healing to you? Like, what do you think healing is? And they're like, oh, that I won't feel this way anymore. And I'm like, wrong. No, your feelings, you can't shut one part of the system down and expect the whole thing to work. That's just not how that works. Yeah. And then when I do practices, because I'm all about bring a pen and paper and get ready to work. Because I don't believe in we're just talking every session, because that's unethical. I'm not paid to be your friend. Like,
beautiful. I love that, by the way. I love that. Like they like heal them, let them be free, you know, like push that baby bird out of the nest.
You should never have to see me again. Like, you should have the skills, and unless something crazy happens, you know, like traumatizing, whatever, you know, that's a different story. But you should have the skills enough to be like, you know what? I trust myself to be able to apply these skills and have enough insight about my life and about myself to know what's driving me.
Yeah.
And the problem that I see a lot is that most people don't know what's driving them. And then another issue is, if they do, they're like, well, what do I do with it? Because most therapists are like, here's some coping skills. Like it's supposed to be like a cookie cutter box formula. Like, everybody's not the same. Right. And if you don't know when to use coping skills or how to use them, it's like giving you a knife and telling you to like use it as a shovel. Like, that's not gonna work.
Give me an example of a coping skill somebody might give you somebody.
So a coping skill, when people would be like, let's bring it to the somatic world, breathe. Mm-hmm. I breathe all day. Like, what do you mean? Telling me to breathe.
Yeah, exactly.
I do it without thinking. What are you talking about? Or like progressive muscle relaxation, right? Like, you know, they don't talk about like, oh, like you just need to tighten up. Like, no. You know what I found? I'm trying to see if I can find a formula to this. So hopefully the app we can do research eventually. But if people are in defense mode, maybe what they need to do is punch something and go run or get that out of your system, because what the body is looking for is a release of that adrenaline, right? So it's not just like, oh, here, go meditate when you're angry. Like, do you think
that's actually the opposite?
I'm mad?
Yeah, it's the opposite of 180.
Right. Like, no, like what are we talking about?
And I hate it. I think we've been trained especially as women, I keep bringing this back to women, but we've been trained as women to not trust our own body and our own senses. And it starts early and it's small and it's insidious. Like, oh, are you really going to wear that? Or make sure you smile. Or are you sure that's what you want to do? Or are you sure that's what you want to say? And because people are constantly asking, are you sure this is what you want to do or say? Or, you know, like, or if you wear that, you will be perceived as X, right? You'll be perceived as a slut. You'll be perceived as a prude. You'll be perceived as a whatever. Because you kind of have a lot of this like social conditioning, you learn not to trust your instincts. You're like, oh, well, my instinct was to wear this or to smile or not to smile or do this or that, the other. And I'm being told that that's wrong. So we learn from a very young age to go against our instincts and our reflexes. And now when somebody like really wrongs me or really upsets me and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm behind a screen and a client is yelling at me through an email and I'm just supposed to zen smile and then go, oh, I'm supposed to breathe through this. Right? Like, no.
Yes. I agree with you 100%. Like social conditioning, like we can definitely talk about that in a little bit. But, you know, I think it's important for people to realize whenever something happens to you, if the response is automatically defense, right? If the response is automatically given so I can make it stop, your nervous system's out of whack.
Yeah.
Right? Like a question, and I do give people like, my husband is like very linear, like extremely linear. He's like, I don't get it unless I break it down. And so I've had to learn to ask myself, okay, how can I explain this in a very linear, clear, practical way to people? Because I think in the therapy world, we speak a lot up here in theories and this is what it should look like. And like you said, like, oh, these symptoms and here's a diagnosis. I'm sorry. Like, even though I'm a therapist, I believe like most of these diagnoses, are we really like, if I evaluate everybody has a diagnosis. So is it really the fact that we all have a diagnosis, or are we just trying to understand our body's responses to events
100%.
Versus calling it a mental health issue? Like,
the DSM should be like made much smaller and says like the body is responding to stress.
Right. I 100% agree. And And what's crazy is that EMDR and somatics are very, very few people that do these type of therapies, and there's still like crap that we get because of those modalities. Well, CBT, and like, I'm like, you can't think your way out of trauma. I'm sorry. You cannot think your way. And even DBT, which is emotional regulation, you cannot regulate yourself out of trauma. Like, if I can just put that as a big sign to everybody, you cannot. You will bust your head trying to figure out, and then it goes into the guilt and shame cycle. I just can't get it right. No matter what I do, I can't get it right. There's something wrong with me. And so you go into this, you know what? Well, then I'm just meant to be alone.
Yes.
I'm just meant to not be around people because, I just can't. You can't. You have to process your way out of trauma.
And then if you're a perfectionist or an overthinker, you've been trained that if you do it wrong, especially the first time, that you will get in trouble.
Yes.
And so you try to do it the first time and it's weird and you suck at it. It's like riding a bicycle for the first time. You fall over and you're like, oh, well, that didn't work. So therefore, I'm just going to throw it out. That's something also we have to work with, right? Is like, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel funky. It's going to be very foreign. And it's a muscle. We got to exercise it, right? Like I remember doing EMDR the first time. I was like, the very first time I had way too many high expectations for it. I was like, oh, it's almost like in my mind, I was like, oh, so it's like a ketamine therapy. Like I get to go in, they're going to do the little paddles and then I'm going to walk out fixed. And it didn't work. And I was like, well, what the hell?
Yes. It's crazy because like a lot of my clients, when I do EMDR, I'm like, look, I don't introduce it to them right away. I'm like, I do tell them that this is what I do and eventually we will get here. But I'd like to know like how they tolerate their window of tolerance. Your window of tolerance is what can I tolerate before I'm dysregulated? And some people have one this big, like they can't even talk about like what happened. And then the people that can talk about what happened, the people that logic everything away, right? Yeah, but I'm fine. I'm fine. I just got raped.
They're so dissociated that like, yeah.
Correct. And when we talk about dissociation, like I want to go into like childhood stuff real quick. People don't get that between 0 and 7, like your brain has, and before 0 and 9 has a high chance of dissociating. Yeah. So I do this exercise where I have my clients do their timeline like of their life. And I have certain things that I'm like, hey, like just bullet point, like these things, events, whatever. And I give them a list to pick from. I cannot tell you how much I learn just by having clients do that and just watching them do that exercise.
Yeah.
I can tell, do they check out? Where are their memory gaps? Where do they have foggy memory? Where can they be like, well, I can't recall much of anything from this time. Red flag to me, right? Mm-hmm. Or I can't pick from this bullet list of things because I'm writing out my life story. That's another one, right? Mm-hmm. Like it tells me so much. And the way your body's reacting, I look, do they get stiff, right? Mm-hmm. Like, are they, those are things that like your body speaks, even when your mouth doesn't.
Oh, like more so, right? So I have a 12-year-old and she really wanted therapy. She was like, I need to talk to somebody other than you. I'm like, awesome. So at the time during COVID, the only thing that was available was online therapy. And she was like, no, straight up no. And she could sense, even at the time, like she needed somebody in the room to help co-regulate with her. But also there's like so much that's invisible just in that energy field that you're talking about, right? Like posture, blinking, swallowing, just like you sense when somebody walks in and they're in a bad mood, right? Or you sense when like somebody walks in and they like open up and like they're like lighting up the room. We don't give enough credit to the energy that we not only give off, but also that other people can pick up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's nothing like that in person. What's so funny, I just do mostly telehealth. That's what's crazy about it. Yeah. Like that's what's crazy is that I sense and I can pick up these things just
that's
because
a
I do
training on your part, because
look,
that's good.
I think I'm over like sensitive. So
Yeah.
I have to turn it off. No, what's crazy is that it's called attunement. Like there's a thing called attunement that we have. And it's again this natural instinct that we have. Again, just tap into it, clear out the network of the trauma, right? And then all of a sudden you'll know, ooh, like, and some people are just more gifted in this area. Like there's been time I look at somebody and it's crazy and it's weird. And I know that they've been assaulted, or I know that something, because like there's something in them that like I calls out to me and I feel I'm like, oh, there's something here.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so fragile and sensitive. And even through telehealth, I'm like, hey, like I noticed this. Like I felt this, like what's here, you know? It's called attunement. And we have this, I'm about to get really nerdy, mirror neurons in our brains that really mirror people. And it was made to be a survival mechanism. There's not enough studies on mirror neurons yet, but all we know about the mirror neurons is that we were made to mirror each other. Yes. So if people are mad at you all the time, reflect, right? Like if you like you have to look at like, what am I giving off, and why are people responding to me a certain way? And a good way to analyze that is, is it like this in every area of my life or just with some people? Like that's how you can distinguish if it's a them problem or a you problem.
Yeah. No, but if you keep, you're like, oh my God. I had somebody who there were like, I think it was 6 car accidents in like 4 years. And they told me, they said, but they're never my fault. I'm like, okay, they can't all, something's incongruent here, right? Like you can't be in that many car accidents. And also like if you're constantly having drama, like there's always drama in your life, right? Like, what's the source of that drama? Is the source of the drama maybe you? Are you?
Yeah, like who's at the center? Yeah. I find that that's one of the things, I'm gonna laugh. That's one of the things that my clients say that they like about me. They're like, you call me out on my bull crap. Like they literally tell me that. And I'm like, I know when to turn it on and turn it off. Like, you know, I'm not just gonna be like, yeah, you're full of it. Like, that's not what I do. Like I wouldn't have any clients if I did, you know, but I do like what you were saying earlier, meeting people where they're at is so important, but there's also me holding you accountable for where you want to be. Yeah. And so I had a client talking about like common denominator. He's older, like, you know, in the 50s area. And he actually was talking about like relational problems that he was having. And I was like, hey, let's like explore your dating history. Like, I want to understand, you know? And I am right out every person he's ever dated, how long it lasted, what he liked about him, what he didn't like about him, why it ended, right? And when something powerful about putting pen to paper that gets people to see, oh, and I'm like, well, what does that say about you and how you contribute? Because what people don't understand, and I love to always bring it back to this, I believe relationships don't go both ways. Like I call it a threefold relationship. Okay. There is the relationship I have with myself. Yes. The relationship I have with you. Mm-hmm. And the relationship you have with me. Yes. Because that can look very different in all aspects. And the relationship I have with myself impacts all of it. And the relationship they have with me helps me change my expectation for them. Yes. Yes. And or make me realize I am a part of the problem. And the only thing that came up with, so I'm just like, hey, have you noticed that even like with your child, you can be a little critical? Oh, what do you mean? I just like things a certain way. I'm like, well, how do you think that's received by the other party? Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, well. And I'm like, so you're either going to keep running into the same issue or you have to learn. He's like, well, I just can't have expectations. I'm like, that's not what I said. But in order to have a healthy relationship, sometimes we have to reduce our expectations and meet people where they are. Meet people versus where we want them to be. And maybe like, I love this idea of putting everything on paper. I'm really big into journaling, right? There's so many studies that show that as soon as you put something on paper, it activates both hemispheres of brain, much like EMDR, much like somatic
work. And so with both hemispheres of your brain online, you see connections that you just wouldn't normally if you're just ruminating and thinking about it. Yeah. But what I love about journaling, all of this stuff, like the bullet points, is you immediately start to see patterns that maybe were not visible to you before, right? And that is where the magic is. It's like, oh, this is a pattern I repeat often. And how can I pause? So, we give people somatic tools, and we try to do it based on their nervous system. So we have people do a daily check-in based on where we believe that their nervous system is. We give them tools to, like you said, punch the air, or to, actually, if they're down in depression, or sort of a collapse state, we try and actually have them put some energy back into their body. Mm-hmm. But what I think is missing is sometimes looking at those patterns is that can be dysregulating. It's like, oh shit, I'm the monster, or I'm the one who's causing all the chaos. Mm-hmm. And that can be very confronting. That can be really dysregulating. And so understanding how to use a somatic tool in that moment where you just get up and shake, or bounce around a little bit, or go into the other room and grab a pillow and start to slam it on the ground, or push against a wall. These sound like really kind of dumb things to do for 30 seconds, but they help you move through the feeling of feeling activated or charged up.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what people don't realize too, is just one, recognition is not about judgment, and it's important to start recognizing that in order to grow, you have to take judgment outside of the picture of whether this is good or bad. What
did you just say? Recognition is not judgment?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's an Instagram quote.
Okay. We'll cut these clips real quick. Uh-huh. But, and I think it's hard for people when someone that cares about them confronts them about something they don't like, because they perceive it as judgment.
Yes. And
in any healthy relationship, recognition is just the foundation for mutual growth and healing, and it's just crazy that, like how you said, knowing when to activate, when not to activate, right? But what I always take it back to observing little kids. I have a toddler and a 4-year-old.
Oh, Danielle.
Oh yeah.
It's both you're oh, my teacher and also my dysregulator.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's crazy is you won't even begin to scratch the foundation. Again, if you just start trying to logic and analyze stuff, your brain is the smartest and dumbest thing ever created. I tell you what, because it's just oh no, this goes in this file. This is why this is happening. And it's not, it's lying to you. And unless you bring that part of you that's wise in, or that spiritual part of you, you will always be trying to figure out with no answers. Right. Yes. So taking a step back as a therapist, I learning somatics and looking at my son and looking at my daughter, what do they do when they're mad? They punch, they scream, they throw things. And I'm when did we learn to stop embracing our instinct and be sophisticated when this part of sophisticated self is what's causing you to stay stuck?
Yes.
You can't think or logic your way out of feelings and acceptance or vulnerability.
And I love it when you're watching children and they're super bored and they just start swinging their arms, or they're they're doing things to regulate themselves. And what do? We tell them to stop it, stop fidgeting, right? Stop moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're adults, I always tell people it doesn't change. It really doesn't. The only thing that changes as an adult is now that my brain is fully developed and I start operating off the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, more than my instinctive part of the brain. And I think that causes more problems when it comes to developing insight about yourself. I tell my clients, this is funny. I'm that's a good logical answer. Now give me the answer of your heart.
Okay, so the first time I did a somatic trauma therapy session, I was asked to describe how I was feeling, and I was describing it, and they were okay, well those are really great essay words, Like, what's a 4-letter word that you can use now? And it took me 10 minutes. So these sessions were recorded, so I went back and I listened to them, and I was like, it took me 10 minutes to tap into how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even then I was like, am I doing it right?
Yes. I love my clients that are very up here, because I was that person too. Like, I'm not going to lie. I was flight all the time. Like, I don't have time to think. What are you talking about? And they're like, oh, feel your body. And I kid you not, I'd be so freaking annoyed. I'm like, the hell do you mean by feel my body? I can't, like, it's my body. I feel it. Like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking? Feel your feelings. You're like, yeah, I feel angry. Shut up. Right.
Like, so people that have trauma histories, the only like emotional vocabulary I have found is anger and annoyance. I'm annoyed.
And sadness.
Right. And sadness, if you're okay with it, because in my culture, suck it up, buttercup. What you got? What you trying to
Jocelyn, where are you from?
I'm Hispanic, so.
Suck it up. Suck it up.
Why are you crying? Like, you'll be all right. We went through worse.
Yes, exactly.
So that is something, like, especially for people like in the minority culture, like, I'm like, we have to do a better job at expanding our vocabulary, and I have found that most of us don't know how to feel. Like, we don't, because for so long you've been taught to shut up, get over it, stop crying, right? And if you cry, I'm gonna make you cry more, and what do you think your brain does?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I said that to my son the other day, because he's a big crier, and I'm like, nobody touched you. Like, do you want a reason to cry? I was like,
you were like, oh wait, where'd that come from?
Learned memory.
Yeah. Okay, so just side note.
Yeah.
I would love to help you in any way, shape, or form, because this, going back to what you said in the beginning, this is work that everybody needs to have access to, and we need to find a way as professionals. I'm going to use air quotes now because nobody's a professional. We're all just different levels of learning, but we have to be able to bring this work to everybody, because that's the only way that we can heal is in the collective. We can't heal as individuals. So when you talked about that, we heal together, or we heal, and whenever we're sad or anxious, our body makes oxytocin for a reason. And that's because that's the coupling hormone, right? So it wants you to be with somebody else. And yet the thing that we do is we isolate. So we get to, as the quote unquote experts, we get to go out there and share with as many people far and wide.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that we don't even realize that, that it takes connection to heal. And your brain, you're like, what do you mean? Like, your brain is like, hell no, this is dangerous. And that's why it feels so uncomfortable when you hug someone. Let me tell you something. When you talked about doing that, just talking about hugging 10 people, for me, my body was like, oh no.
And there was 100 people in line. I was like, wait, there's another 90?
No. And that's for me, that would be triggering for me. I would not, I will hug a one person. Yeah. And that's it. That is my capacity.
And it was a 1 minute hug too. I was like,
no. Let me look. I didn't even know how deep touch has been affected in my life until I did a somatics training and I started becoming more aware of my body. And I recognized I don't even like my husband touch me unless I initiate. And it's not even, I'm not even just talking about sex. Honestly, totally. Sex is great, but it's about hugs and about he'll come and try to play. And I'm just like, woo, back up. Yeah, that's too much. Or my son has this thing where he's like, mama hugs. Cause I taught him how to regulate with me. And I'm like, get off me. I don't like being touched. You need to ask me first, Yeah. And when I look back at my body's history of touch, I'm like, wow, most of the time when I was touched when I was younger was through sexual abuse or being physically hit.
Yes.
Touch for me was not something that was
it's not pleasant,
welcoming or hugging or pleasant. No. The few people that I do remember hugging me, I was not with them for a long period of my life. It was summers because my parents were split up, things like that. Other times I learned to be alone.
Yes.
I learned to be in the comfort of my own company. And then when I did like someone, it was overbearing because, all of a sudden now I'm getting this affection. And then all of a sudden, affection becomes the reason you're in a relationship. And then people wonder why they're either addicted to sex or like addicted to relationships is because your body is craving something that you were never given. It's that intimacy that you will never get fulfilled by another person.
Absolutely.
It's so crazy.
It is crazy. And it's heartbreaking too, because as we start to talk more openly about sexual assault and sexual misconduct, like we start to really, really, I'm going to say sympathize and empathize with women. Yeah. But it's only just now happening, right? Like it's only just now being talked about. So it's probably going to be another 20 or 30 years before we can actually like pull the real lid off.
Yeah.
The real Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
But that, I think for women in general, it's kind of a quote unquote scary world, right? You walk out in the world and you got to hold keys in your hand a certain way, or you've always got to be vigilant. And these are things that we're taught from a young age, right? Like you have to protect yourself. But even when we do protect ourselves, most often, what is it, like 1 in 2 women have been sexually assaulted? I mean, It is staggering.
Insane.
It is staggering.
Insane.
And so now we're talking to women in therapy, and we're like, hey, trust your body, feel into your body.
No.
That's the scariest damn place I've ever been. Like, why would you want me to do that?
And then your body betrays you. Because let's talk about how your body has a different mind than your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Because touch is stimulating. Yeah. So guess what? Like if you were touched inappropriately and your body was like, you like it. And then your brain is like, no, the hell I didn't. Now you're dealing with this internal conflict.
Yeah.
Like that's not talked about.
No, it's like being on like a foot on the gas and a foot on the brake at the same time. Yes. Right? So it's like pushing and pulling. You're like, that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And men too, what's crazy is that men don't even talk about this. I did another interview with a male that talked about, like a Black male talked about being sexually assaulted, when he was younger. And I think that in the Black community, that's why a lot of males are addicted to sex, because they don't even talk about it.
Wow. And
all of a sudden you were introduced to something as a child. And because you're a guy and your body said you liked it. Crazy.
It is.
Crazy. I think it happens more to all of us that we'd like to admit, and we don't talk about it. And especially in America, like where sex is idolized.
And also like, it's put on some sort of like weird pendulum, right? Like, be sexy, but not too sexy, be promiscuous, but not too promiscuous. Yes. Make sure that you are, but be prudish because, and coquettish because you don't want to like, give people the wrong impression. And we're very confused about sex, I think, in this nation.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it leads to a lot of shame, leads to a lot of dysfunction, leads to a lot of people just, like you said, being abused. And what do hurt people do? Hurt people hurt people. Exactly.
And now all of a sudden I don't know what to do with this, and it breaks my heart because it's like, what do you do other than provide education? Like my kids, even though they're little, they know their body parts. I'm like, your vagina and your penis. Like we don't say no other words.
Yeah, exactly.
And even though they're young, they're like, nobody touches it. Not me or daddy or nobody's taking care of you. Like you clean yourself, no, and the only thing we can do is educate and be protective, because I worked for child services, and I'll tell you the people that abuse kids the most are people that know them.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So the people that you trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the only way to do is to educate your own children and tell them this is what's okay and what's not. Stop using nicknames. Stop using things that you shouldn't use. And so anyways, I feel like we went on another trail.
No, more tangents.
But that is a part of body work, like understanding your body and trauma. So if anything, Shawna, like that you can tell for our audience, one thing that they can take away, what would you say?
My biggest thing that your body is not betraying you. It is not out to sabotage you. It is not here to hurt you. It is not failing you. Your body is always protecting you, and it's by design. And so knowing that your body is here to help you and to keep you safe if something's going wrong with it, if you suddenly are coping with a lot of symptoms, you can't sleep, you can't digest food, you're losing hair, you're angry all the time. These are ways that your body is telling you, hey, I've been protecting you for a long time and I'm running out of resources and it's time for you to actually start filling my cup and help me out here. It's not trying to say, hey, you're a bad person, and so I'm going to do something to sabotage you.
Yeah, I love it. It's so true. It's so true. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Shawna. Hopefully maybe we can do another one about different topics.
I would love to. I think you're fabulous.
Yes, I loved everything about it. I think you're great too. So, and the knowledge that you brought in today was very helpful to the audience.
If you like this episode, follow us for more mental health education and humor. Don't just learn about mental health, apply it by playing the game of your life. Create your free account for exclusive access to communities and a wealth of resources.